Hello, everyone. Alvaro Cortez Jr., aka Lance Danger here. And I know I've been saying before that I'm going to explain what exactly is the Book of Warlord and what exactly it means when I'm saying Book 1 and Book 2 and whatnot. I will explain to you as I put some lo fi background. There we go. So, Fred Peterson, the mighty warlord. I have stated before in other videos and other social media posts what exactly the books are and what they entail, but I don't actually really say it enough. So I just wanted to break it down in the simplest terms possible. What exactly I mean by that. And actually, let me take my logo off from the corner real quick so you guys can appreciate the slideshow a little better in this instance. Let me see where logo. There you go. I'll put that back on at the end. Anyway, the books of Fred Peterson, the Mighty Warlord. Everything you wanted to know. I will try to keep it as spoiler free as possible, but I have to address certain plot points because of the title of each book so it can make sense. So, without further ado, what are the books? Why and how many? The story of Fred Peterson, the Mighty Warlord, is essentially divided into seven overarching story arcs that is interconnected by smaller arcs. Uh, like in book one, for example, the first three chapters, not three chapters, but the three. Sorry, Hunter Jr. wanted to participate. I look at the screen to make sure that everything's okay. Anyway, I'm gonna leave it in there because I have a ton of things to do and I don't have much time to edit. Anyway, as I was saying, the first book, for example, is divided into three story arcs that have an interconnecting theme that weaves everything together into the overall picture of that book. And that book itself also interconnects with the others that weave a whole story. One of my main inspirations for writing, as I've mentioned before, and if you haven't heard it, is of course the Chronicles of Narnia. And that is a seven-book series as well. And I guess it kind of stuck with me to kind of do it like overarching seven-book structure kind of thing with Warlord. Yeah, if I had known how difficult that was going to be, I might have started off with something else before Warlord, not gonna lie. Uh, but I wouldn't change anything, to be honest. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. But let that be a lesson. If you're going to start out, unless you have like this inordinate amount of time and resources, it's better to start off slow with maybe like an anthology, a one shot, a miniseries. I pretty much started off with a 7 book saga. That's why I had no life in high school amongst many things. But once again, like I said, I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world because it's just too much fun. So essentially, that's what I refer to with Warlord when I say book one and book two. We are currently in book two of Fred Pearson, the Mighty Warlord, and once again, seven. I thought at the time was kind of like a good happy medium of telling enough stories within that world that I wanted to make without kind of burning myself or overstaying my welcome. Like in my mind, it was going to be kind of like Sandman in that sense that Sandman was only like 70 some issues, and Neil Gaiman pretty much left at the height of the popularity of the comic. That's pretty much what my plans were for Warlord, actually, to make about maybe 75 issues 80 at the most, hopefully have told a good enough story to leave people satisfied with the story, but kind of itching to kind of want more. But obviously, book two has ballooned so much, and I'll get a little bit into that in a little bit later. Um, that 75 issues is definitely not going to be enough. Like, it was already pretty much the most ambitious Puerto Rican comic, I think, at the time to think about all this, and something that's actually going to exceed, probably far exceed 75 and 80 issues. um right now I don't even have like a final issue number. I have the ending of the story, but I don't have like the actual number anymore of what issue is going to end on, because I have to pretty much wait for book two to end for me to do that. But anyway, as you can see on the screen, if you're watching the screen, if not, keep playing your video games. I don't blame you. I usually am cleaning or gaming when I watch YouTube videos anyway. The seven books comprise of book one, Beginnings, book two, Dark Light, book three, Breakdowns, book four, Heroes at Last, book five, Run, Warlord, Run, book six, Sage, book seven, Full Circle. And those are the stories that presents the overarching storyline. Again, like, each book has a theme and has Easter eggs and little clues at what's going to happen in the next book. And that's something that people kind of go discovering as they read as well. I leave Easter eggs about what's going to happen, like in the places you least expected, like the header, for example, the head banner in the Dub Web comics. In the final arc of book one, I put a huge actually scene from the actual comic as the header, but without the context, nobody knew what it meant. So people at first were like kind of like curious. The readers were kind of curious about what it meant because it was so out of context. But they eventually even forgot about the header. Of course, like, the header is something you'll see probably like for a second and then just go into the protein, the meat of the thing, which is just reading the actual web comic. And then when the webcomic reached that particular scene that I had put as the header in the webcomic, people were like, holy shit, that was a spoiler all along. And we didn't know. I don't know if to feel like that's genius, or if I should feel mad about that. It was just great seeing the different reactions when people saw that particular scene. And if you've read Warlord, especially the chapter 11 specifically, at in the real time that I was uploading, and in the real time that head banner was up there, you'll know what I'm talking about. And if not, if you're curious, you can go and you'll see it in the comments are still there as well. And in the original soundtracks that I've been making as well, since it is very connected to the story, there is a lot of Easter eggs and callbacks, not just to the story in the web comics, but the songs as well also give other clues and actually kind of interconnects with each other from one soundtrack to another. Like, one song in particular would kind of start in one soundtrack, and the other song will be kind of like the bookmark to that song, or a continuation, or like an answer to the other song. So everything just interconnects. There's a reason for everything in this story, in this world, and that's also why it's so massive to an extent. So those are the seven books. Let's talk a little bit more about it. Yes, so you guys can get like the overall feel and overall understanding of what I'm aiming for. Book one, Beginnings, and that's in every chapter title page. which is where the little black and white drawing with the title of that chapter and the title of that specific book goes up. Book one, Beginnings. Very simple, straight to the point. It's the beginning of the story. Um, the four major characters are introduced, and when I say the four major characters, of course I'm referring mostly to Fred, Jane, Cheryl, and John. And some of you might be wondering, like, how come Cheryl? And again, I don't want to give spoilers, but how come Cheryl is considered a main character and John as well? Not to give too many spoilers about John himself, like especially in book two, he's been kind of absent for a lot of it, and he's in there in some big moments, and he's going to be there in a big moment towards the end of book two as well, but he isn't there as consistently as he was in book one. Well, those are the four pillars of this comic and the ones that pretty much get the story going, and there's just so much history between the four characters that we'll see throughout the entire overarching story that it feels like neither character it feels like both characters are there consistently, referring to Cheryl and John. So again, book one, simple, straight to the point. Beginnings, this is the introduction of the four main characters, a couple of major side characters like the mysterious exorcist is also involved in the story and makes his debut here. A Funny Bone, for example, and big antagonists that are kind of looming in the background, but then they don't really make their presence felt until the end of this book and until book two. And now, book two, which is the book we're currently in, book two, Dark Light. Dark Light refers to this band that believe they can take over the world and mold it into what they believe is the best version of what it can be. Of course, these are the antagonists that appear every so often in book one. And that, of course, includes Akuma, which is one of the biggest antagonists in the story. And I kind of hesitate to say villain. And by the end of book two, you'll see why. And again, other secondary characters that are important to the story are introduced into this one, like Tom the uh, Tom the Fantastic Dark Avenger, um, Dita Yolandita, the Fabulous Rocker, Exorcist's wife, Mirage. So other very important characters are also introduced into this book as well as other antagonists that we're going to be seeing developed more in future books as well. But this book basically just kind of introduces the rest of the gang that's going to be pretty much supporting book three onwards, and that are going to be involved in major plot points that give the story more spice and makes it meatier. Book three, which hopefully will start soon. My goal is to finally start book three next year, either mid 2025 or late 2025. As you can see, I was already doing promotional work in 2011 for book three. And again, to be fair to myself, I went through, as most of you know, I went through a lot of health issues after a car accident that I was involved with, that really set everything back. And on top of that, um, going back to what I was saying earlier, that book two ballooned to a much bigger story than it originally was. When I was doing book two, when I was finally able to pick up where I left off in chapter 19, which is where I was at that point when I had the accident. Warlord had been coming out pretty consistently every month. I was going at a pace where there was practically a chapter a month, which is the equivalent to a mainstream comic book schedule with an issue coming out every month. And in some instances, two a month or one and a half a month, which was freaking insane back then. But I really was excited to put this story out, and seeing that I was close to at that point getting to the midway point and going into the home stretch for book two. I just really wanted to like push it out there because I'm really excited for book three. Personally speaking, book three is one of my favorite stories within the seven books. It's definitely one of the most emotionally intense stories in the book. And again, you'll see when we get there. But book two, contrary to book one, where I didn't deviate too much from the original scripts, I decided to include another story, which is The Sky is Falling and No One Knows, which is chapters 20 through 22. Which introduces the element of emotional chaos in Fred Peterson, which is something that I was going to introduce much later. But I, at the last second, I swear, guys, it was like at the last second, I thought to myself, if I don't introduce that element now, the impact for when it does eventually come out is not going to be that impactful, if that makes sense. Like if I just spring it out of nowhere at the original point that I was going to do it, um it was just gonna feel like something that I just threw in there at the last minute. So, or at least that's how I felt anyway. So I just thought I am going to introduce it now, so that when it does happen later on in different points of the story, people are gonna, hopefully the readers will be like, oh shit, this is gonna go down. And that kind of derailed everything, to be honest. It derailed my timing, it derailed the scheduling, because I had to make three chapters that I had not planned for pretty much on the spot. And originally it was actually going to be four chapters, but I had to actually axe one of the chapters because I was starting to feel burnt out. That's probably the only time doing the webcomic that I actually really felt burnt out, because I was still recovering from the accident, which took me a long time to recover. Also, I ended up moving from Puerto Rico to New York again, and adjusting to life in New York again was a culture shock, and a lot of emotions in there. So that also kind of kept chipping away at my emotional state to be able to do the web comic. So that storyline really cost me. It really drained me to do those three chapters, and I feel like um it's probably like, in my mind, the weakest chapters, at least 20 and 21, because without that fourth chapter that I was going to do, um it kind of lessens the impact that I wanted that story in particular to have. But at the same time, I just know that if I would have tried to push forward with that fourth chapter in that story, I probably would have given up on the webcomic completely. And there are times where you just have to like put it on a balance and be like, well, you either take the L and keep going, or try to push forward and run the risk of just extreme burnout. And I just decided at that moment to take the L, and eventually I will do that fourth chapter when I'm in a better place, when I do the eventual printings of the manga volumes and the physical copies and the Truthful Comics edition and whatnot. So that fourth chapter will eventually come out, but that was the wrong time to do it because mentally, emotionally, I had so much fatigue from so many things happening that I just couldn't. So I had to pretty much compress that storyline towards the end of chapter 21 and pretty much all of chapter 22. But I do feel that doing that, I turned a corner as a writer and the series as a whole by doing that, because chapter 22 I think ended up being one of the most interesting and most intense chapters of the book, and a lot of readers really loved that chapter, and it kind of set the stage for the tone of the rest of the book so far. So, sometimes you win some, you lose some. Like you have to take your victories where you can, my people. You have to take your victories where you can, my friend. So yeah, in a nutshell, that was the whole problem with book two. And as you can see for book three, to talk about it briefly, we see Tempest is in the promo. Tempest, if you don't know which character that is, she is the daughter of the second, um, well, not second, well, the second biggest organized crime faction in Puerto Rico, which is, of course, the Otomo Yakuza, the Otomo clan. She is the granddaughter of the head of that clan, and she is an assassin. She does most of the big time assassinations for her clan, for her grandfather, and carries out the biggest missions for them. And she is going to be a huge part of book three and the war that we've been seeing brewing since book one between Fatfish, which is pretty much the head of organized crime in Puerto Rico. We've seen a war escalating between these two factions in the background as the chapters have moved on. And it's starting to reach a boiling point in this story where it kind of overtakes the main stage for this particular book. But it actually does tie into the overarching storyline as well. I know it probably doesn't make much sense without the context of why this war between these two factions that's been happening in the background mostly impacts of the main storyline, but hopefully it will make sense once we finally get to that book. All I can say is that Breakdowns is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, story of the books of Fred Peterson's The Mighty Warlord. Like, there's a lot of emotional content in this one, and it's super intense in many parts, and it's one of the more action heavy stories as well. And now going further into the future, book 4, Heroes at Last. And again, I can't really talk too much about it because I don't want to do too many spoilers. But one of the biggest characters in this book, if you're looking at the screen, that is Akuma. Um, he had one of the biggest moments, if not the biggest moment of book one, in chapter 11, the final chapter of book one. And he's been appearing very sparingly ever since. Like, Akuma is a character I really want to be careful with because he's been doing small little cameos and been like lurking in the shadows ever since chapter one. And he is definitely, despite of everything he's done, he is one of the most popular characters in the book as well. And I don't want to risk overexposing him. And I don't want to risk putting him in moments where it doesn't makes sense to the story. Like, I don't want to put him in the book, yes, to put him in the book because he's popular to many of the readers. I wanted to have intention whenever he appears in the book. So he's been appearing very sparingly and in very key and unexpected moments. And book four is pretty much where a lot of things that's been building up since chapter one, yes, fucking explodes. It's just the nuclear meltdown in book four. And I hope you all enjoy book four. That's all I can say about book four at the moment, other than the title is Heroes at Last. Book five, Run, Warlord, Run. And as you can see, I was talking about Fatfish and his faction earlier. If you don't know who that character is, that's who he is, front and center in that illustration, along with his assassins that works for him. Fatfish is the king of organized crime in Puerto Rico. And Run Warlord Run, that's a fun book because this is essentially all action, this book. And again, I can't enter into too much spoilers, but I will say that a certain character is given power, and it is a character that does not deserve it, and the last one of the last characters to actually get power. And when I say power, it doesn't necessarily mean superpowers or anything like that. Let's just leave it at power. This character obtains a silly amount of power, and it shakes up the whole story at that point. It turns everything upside down. And the war that's been brewing between Fatfish and the Yotomo clan just comes to a head in this book. And a lot of things from before is going to make sense in this book as well. This war that's been happening between these two crime families is going to make sense also on the overall impact of the story. And it also has an impact in the very last story of Warlord as well. Again, don't want to give too much spoilers, but this one is a fun one. This one's the most action filled book out of all the books is Run Warlord Run, and that's why I wanted to kind of reflect it in the title of the book. And why is it Run Warlord Run? You'll have to read it when you get to that point. I'm sorry. Book six, the next to last book, Sage. I can't say anything about it. I literally cannot say anything about this book because it is going to spoil everything. All I can say is book six is a wild one. Probably one of the most emotionally charged stories in Warlord. And I'm just going to leave it at that. I am literally leaving it at that. Book seven. Book seven is Full Circle. And full circle is a phrase that's been kind of repeated, and a theme that's been kind of repeated in little instances throughout book one and book two. There's a certain character that sometimes pops up that says everything is going to come full circle. We're all going to see each other again when we come full circle. And book seven is full circle. Book seven is where everything from book one, chapter one, up to this point, everything gets it comes to its natural conclusion. Hopefully, all the threads and plot lines will be resolved by then, and many of the questions that a lot of readers had will be answered in this book as well. It is the most emotionally charged and the most intense in terms of emotions and action as well. Like, this one is very heavy in the emotions, very heavy in the actions, and the action aspect as well. And well, the main reasons that it's so heavy emotionally in the action is because by this time, hopefully, you'll all be so invested in the story and characters that whenever something happens, again, it's going to feel very heavy when the action happens and you don't want people to get hurt or whatever. And I will warn you that a lot of people that you see in this image here from this promotional art from 2009, not everyone is going to make it out of book 7. In some cases they aren't even going to make it to book 7, so don't get too attached. If you've read book 1 entirely, from chapter 1 to 11, you should know by now that not every character is necessarily safe in this story. So don't that's all I can say without giving away too many spoilers. Don't get too attached to all of the characters, because you don't know what's going to happen, especially by the time that we get to book 7. Again, if you've read the entire first book of Warlord, there's a couple of people that you already know aren't going to be with us by book 7. I'll leave it at that because I want to spoil it for people that hasn't read book 1. And there you have it. That, in essence, is the 7 books of Fred Pearson, the Mighty Warlord. I did it that way pretty much in the notebooks as well, except that it was fewer books in that sense. I believe it was 5 books. Yes, it was 5 books in the original notebook series, and the storylines were a lot shorter. Because again, I hadn't built the world at that point the way I fleshed it out when I decided that I actually wanted to make real comics of this story, compared to just, um comic books that I was doing in school notebooks when I was in middle school and high school. Let me go ahead and I can go ahead and put the logo back on. Boop. It's not covering anyone's face anyway from the image. So there you have it. In a nutshell, those are the 7 books of Fred Pearson, the Mighty Warlord. That's why I personally refer to it as book 1, book 2, so on and so forth, because it's a kind of a reminder to myself also to know where exactly, at what point I am talking about this story or that story or this plot point or this element or this character in specific. It's basically a place to remind me of where I'm standing with the story when I'm actually talking about it. And let me just put that. There we go. So if you're actually looking at the video, you guys can see once again the titles of each book, which again is book 1, Beginnings, book 2, Dark Light, book 3, Breakdowns, book 4, Heroes at Last, book 5, Run Warlord Run, book 6, Sage, and book 7, Full Circle. And yes, I have the final chapters written out. Like I said, book 2 has kind of thrown a curveball at me, so I will see how long it'll take to finish everything. I don't know if I'm going to make some books shorter as a result of book 2 taking so long to finish, but all I can say is really thank you to everyone that has been reading Fred Pearson, the Mighty Warlord. As incredible as it sounds, there has been some readers that have been around for the whole 18 years, and I cannot express how much I'm grateful for that my little characters have been able to stick around for so long and bring some level of distraction or entertainment to people and to people around the world. It's really insane, and to see that Warlord is actually finding a new audience over the last couple of years, especially now that I've been updating a little more consistently again. It just makes my heart grow 7 times its size, guys. Really, I do appreciate it. This video has gone on long enough. This is one of the longest Vitas ever. So I'm just gonna cut it at this because I got a story to complete, y'all.